I knew this job would shred my nerves, but I didn't expect the first stone in the wall to be a man. The building stared down at me like an old aristocrat who'd outlived all the parties and half the heirs. 19th-century brick, flaking like a bad sunburn. Stained glass windows dimmed under sheets of dust. The air smelled like cold earth and wet lime, the kind of damp that settles into your cuffs and judges you for wearing a suit to a construction site. I adjusted my glasses, lifted my tablet, and started cataloging the chaos. Columns misaligned by a century of neglect. Cornices bowed like tired shoulders. Floorboards with the kind of soft give that made my stomach tighten. I photographed everything, every crack, every patch of plaster, every crooked nail. Order first, feelings later, preferably never. "Boss! He's here!" A worker called from somewhere in the echo, like the building itself carried his voice down the grand hall. I didn't look up. The first rule of dealing with new crews is to establish pace. Mine. "We'll begin with the nave," I said. Half to the nearest foreman, half to myself. No machinery on original tile until I flag the pathing. And for the love of proportion, no one touches the south columns. A shadow dragged across my feet. I looked up, and there he was. Dylan Maddox didn't enter rooms. He occupied them. Tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that made his safety vest look apologetic. Dust streaked his jaw like an intentional bruise. Hands rough, palms ghosted with cement. Working hands, not the ornamental kind you fold for presentations. His eyes were a dark, slow burn, and when he looked at me, something in my muscles braced like I'd heard thunder. "Heard the architect was precious," he said. Voice all gravel and early mornings. "Didn't think they meant literally." I smiled the way you smile at a dog right before it bites. "And you must be the K." I caught myself before Knuckle Dragger made a debut. "Contractor." "Good. We'll need a meeting on the scope before your crew does more improvisational damage. That suit been vaccinated against dust?" He hooked his thumbs into his belt, unbothered by the debris haze. "Because it looks like it's about to faint. Dust is predictable," I said, lifting the tablet. "Men with sledgehammer priorities are not." He grinned, slow and wolfish. "So the rumor's true. We did get the arrogant pup in glasses. And there it was, the first stone. And we got the caveman with a hard-on for demolition," I returned. "Even and pleasant." The foreman made a small choking sound. "How lovely." He took 2 steps closer. The temperature didn't change, but it felt like it did. I could list 20 reasons why my pulse jumped. The smell of wet lime always does this. The echo distorts timing. Adrenaline improves memory, but none of them sounded convincing. "We're reinforcing," Dylan said, nodding to the south line of columns. "You keep hugging originals. This place hugs the sidewalk by winter. And we're restoring," I said. "Reinforcement can happen without violating the load path or mutilating the capitals." I specified steel sleeves that respect the original entasis. You know, curvature. "It's in the drawings." "Drawings," he repeated, like the word was a dare. He glanced down at my tablet, then at the building's aching ribs. "Paper's brave. Bricks are honest. Bricks don't lie," I agreed. "Men do. When they're paid by the week." A worker somewhere dropped something that clanged for an eternity. Dust swirled in the stained glass slant. Dylan's gaze ticked to the south columns again, then back to me. "You want it pretty," he said. "I want it standing. I want both. Beauty is structure you can see." He tipped his chin, considering that for half a heartbeat too long. "Then, fine. Let's dance. Show me how your sleeve doesn't choke my crew when we're marrying it to 19th-century vanity." I stepped around him, unwilling to yield pathing. He matched me, not quite blocking, simply existing precisely where I needed air. Irritating. Focus. South columns, 4 survivors, 2 flagged as critical. Capitals carved with a restraint you only got when craftsmanship was a first language. Their bases had been chewed by time and a few careless forklifts. "Here," I said, crouching to point out hairline fractures radiating from an anchor point. "Micro-cracking. If you wrap this in too much steel, you create a stiffness discontinuity. It'll snap under differential settlement. I want sleeves that distribute stress gradually." I looked up. Assuming your crew can pour grout without baptizing the whole column. He bared his teeth in what a lawyer might call a smile. You talk like you iron your socks. I do, I said. It's called respect for fibers. Cute, he muttered. And to the foreman, mark the sleeve speck. We're not drowning any of Remy's precious ancestors. I should have been pleased. Instead, the heat that had been low and ignorable crawled a notch higher. His compliance felt like an argument postponed, not won. He crouched beside me to examine the crack, our shoulders almost touching. The living warmth of him pressed through denim and the faint clean bite of soap under concrete, practical, unscented. My stomach did a traitorous, stupid thing. Focus. I tapped the crack with a gloved knuckle. See the feathering? Shearing? This started when someone... I slid my gaze to him. Bumped the base with a pallet jack. That was before my crew, he said. Not defensive, just stating fact. Last guys treated this like a haunted house. Get in, get out, scare no tourists. Now it's a hospital, I said. You don't scare the patient, you stabilize her, and don't gossip about her stitches. You always talk like that? He asked. Like a catalog married a poem on a construction site? Only when the poem's in danger of being buried in aggregate, I said, standing. He rose with me, a tide I hated noticing. We were too close. The building agreed. Somewhere above us, a staccato tick ran through old plaster, like a throat clearing. I turned toward the sound, heartbeat measuring distance. The crack was minor, spidering across a panel near a clerestory window. Still, it hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. Don't, Dylan warned, because I was already moving a sawhorse under it. You go under that, I'm hauling you out by your collar. It's surface, I said. If this room were failing, you'd feel it in the floor. The joists would. The plaster let out a soft, chastising sigh and crumbled in a veil of dust. I flinched back, felt a hand grab my elbow and yank me into the solid line of a body that shouldn't have felt like safety. We stood there too long. Dust drifted between us, lazy and golden. His hand stayed where it was, warm, rough, anchoring. I was aware of 3 absurd things at once: the radius of his grip around my forearm, the slow pace of his breathing, and the delicate sound of grit settling on my shoes. Surface, he said, low. Right. I was 80% sure, I said, and heard my voice misbehave. Try 90 when I'm not around, he answered. He released me like a statement, stepped past to check the panel, and knocked on the lath with 2 short, learned taps. We'll shore it before lunch. No one goes under. I'll mark the no-go, I said, pulling myself together, and I want a humidity log in every room. This place sweats. He smirked. So do you. I didn't come here to be observed, I said. I came here to prevent preventable tragedies. Oh, I'm observing, he said. And there was something in it that wasn't mockery. Like you're observing me and deciding which drawer to put me in. Let me save you time. Not the one labeled delicacy. I have a drawer labeled blunt instruments, I said. You'll feel at home. He laughed, short, real. It put lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind hard work gives a man. Fine, Remy, you protect your columns. I'll protect you from the ceiling you keep flirting with. I do not flirt with ceilings, I said. I flirt with the idea of doing things properly. Same thing here, he said quietly, almost to the building. Same thing. The crew began to move around us, a choreography I could appreciate, cords snaked to safer. Roots, sawhorses migrated, someone rolled in a dehumidifier with a squeal and an apology. I walked the perimeter, marking, measuring, cataloging. He trailed, sometimes beside me, sometimes ahead, occasionally just watching like I was a puzzle with one piece wrong. At the south columns again, our debate flared, not because it needed to, but because it felt inevitable. You brace here, he said, tapping a point on the base, and the sleeve takes the bite. We give it a day to cure, test load, then move to the next. Fast, clean. You brace here, I corrected, shifting his finger 2 inches, and you respect the stress flow. If you take it all too fast, you shock the old stone. She's stubborn. She'll pretend she's fine until she fails catastrophically. He arched a brow. You always gender your buildings? Only the ones with personalities. I looked up into the dim, fractured light. She's temperamental, a little vain, but she wants to live. You can feel it. He followed my gaze. For a second, the noise fell away. The stained glass, grimy but intact, caught a thin blade of winter sun and cut it into pale rubies and cold sapphires. The floor turned jeweled. His face did too. "You're a strange one," he said. "No judgment, maybe even approval. We'll do it your fussy way." I should have said thank you. Instead, the relief tasted like surrender. And I hate that flavor. "We'll do it the correct way," I said. "Your crew will get a walkthrough. No wheels on tile, no leaning ladders on glass. And if anyone calls this the haunted church again, I'm implementing a fine. That last one's going to cost me," he said. "They already think she talks." "She does," I said before I could stop myself. "You just have to listen when she cracks." As if cued, a hairline seam skittered across the plaster above the southern arch. Swift, deliberate, like a signature being written. I heard it. Soft, dry, intimate. So did he. We both looked up and then at each other. His smile faded into something sharper. "You hear that a lot, do you?" "Cracks?" I managed. "Yes. Words inside them," he said. I swallowed. The room felt warmer by a degree that the dehumidifier couldn't explain. "I hear load redistribution. You hear what you want. I hear that if we don't stop arguing about who's right and start acting like we both are," he said, "this lady's going to punish us for our pride." "Then act," I said, and it came out too fast, because I won't lose her to shortcuts. "Not on my watch." The corner of his mouth kicked. "Good. I hate shortcuts." We stood shoulder to shoulder, looking up at the patient who'd chosen to introduce herself with a hairline fracture right in the moment the architect and the builder found a rhythm for their fight. The crew murmured. Tools hummed. Outside, the city coughed and roared. Inside, I felt the quiet decision of something older than both of us, settling in the bones of the room. Dylan broke the silence first, because men like him always do. "Meeting this afternoon. My office trailer. Bring your sleeve poetry, and you bring your bracing gospel," I said. He started to turn, then looked back. The dust on his jaw made him look mythic, a statue that had decided it was done with stillness. "Welcome to the job, Remy. Welcome to the patient," I said. We moved in opposite directions. For 5 steps, I felt the imprint of his hand at my elbow like a heat left by a lamp. Irritating. Unacceptable. Noted. I lifted the tablet, framed the newest crack, and took a photo. The thumbnail glowed on the screen. A neat white line splitting old plaster. It looked like a smile that knew something I didn't. Order is a shield. That's what I told myself every morning I stepped into my office. Here, everything obeyed the grid I designed for it. The white drafting tables aligned flush with the wall, the blueprints, laid in careful order, the pencils sharpened to an identical angle, the pens arranged not just by color, but by gradient. Even the model columns on my shelf stood by height. Here, even chaos would sit up straight. I ran my finger along the edge of a new print, the vellum crisp and uncreased, every line precise, every notation deliberate. When the world outside felt like rubble, my space became geometry. That was before the door banged open hard enough to shake the lamps. Dylan Maddox didn't knock. Of course he didn't. He strode in with the scent of dust and outside air still clinging to him. His boots tracked faint grit over the clean floor. And then, sin of sins, he sat right down on the edge of my table, jeans leaving a chalky smear across the perfect white surface. I stared at him, at the audacity, at the powdery print of his presence contaminating my sanctuary. "Do you make a habit of desecrating sacred ground?" I asked evenly. "Or is this a new performance just for me?" He smirked, broad arms folded across his chest. Every line of him casual dominance. "You've got more tables than the cathedral's got pews. One smudge won't kill your religion." I inhaled through my teeth. "It's not religion. It's respect." "For paper?" His laugh was low, like a saw through pine. "No wonder you're so stiff. You need a sandbox, Remy. Something safe. A children's castle, not a building that'll eat you alive if you misjudge a beam. The jab landed hot. You think architecture is sandcastles? I think you've never felt how a wall fights you back when it doesn't want to move. I think you've never noticed how a facade breathes when you save it from collapse. He leaned down, dark eyes narrowing, voice dropping just enough to make the lamps hum. You're talking about breathing. I'm talking about bones. He tapped a finger against my blueprint. This line here? Pretty. But in the real world, that column of yours would snap under a stiff wind. My crew's ribs would hold longer than your drawing. The word snap hooked into me. Sharp. You are dismantling a facade that has survived for more than a century. That, I said, jabbing my pen at the sheet, is an historic crime. And you, he fired back, are about to let the whole thing crumble like a drunk leaning on matchsticks. You want to preserve every crack like it's a sacred text. Because it is. My voice rose without permission. That crack is information. It tells me how she's been carrying her weight, where the strain lives, where her story is written. Erase it, and you erase the truth. We were inches apart, our words bouncing sharp between the sterile walls. The office light flickered once, twice, like the room itself was trying to moderate us. I refused to step back. He was heat, I was steel. Reinforcement does not mean replacement, I said through my teeth. The original stone has integrity. It deserves. Integrity doesn't hold the roof up when the snow comes down. His jaw clenched. If you want her to live another 100 years, you brace her with something stronger than nostalgia. Nostalgia? I nearly laughed. This isn't about nostalgia. This is about design, proportion, memory. This city loses enough every year. I won't let your kegs of concrete erase what can be preserved. For a long moment, we just stared, like two opposing forces measuring who would blink first. His eyes held something feral, something that belonged out there with the wrecking balls. Mine burned with the kind of fury only a pen could draw. And then he laughed. He actually laughed. What? I demanded. You, he said, shaking his head. A puppy in glasses, barking about memory like you're defending the honor of a saint. If you weren't so dead serious, I'd think this was a comedy show. I felt the heat crawl into my neck. You, relax. He cut me off, grin still carving his face. I'm not here to bulldoze your shrine. I came to hear your pitch. Show me why your fragile columns won't fold when I breathe on them. It should have been a victory. Instead, my pulse kicked. He had called me fragile without using the word. He had dismissed me while pretending to offer ground. And worst of all, I cared that he listened. I forced myself to recenter, to gesture at the spread of blueprints. Fine. Here, sleeve reinforcements that don't choke the stone. Stress distribution aligned with historic load paths. It's efficient and elegant. He bent lower, so close the rough smell of cement dust mixed with the faint trace of soap on his skin. His finger traced the same line mine had a second before. Efficient, maybe. Elegant? He grunted. You're making this too precious. The lamp above us flickered harder, buzzing. He noticed. His head tilted toward the light. You got electrical issues in here? No, I said too quickly. My stomach tightened. It wasn't faulty wiring. I knew that bone deep. This was the second time. The building, or something, responded when we clashed. It's fine. Doesn't look fine, he muttered. Neither do you. I straightened my shoulders. If you don't trust the plan, don't waste my time. But you will not reduce this project to rubble just because you like the sound of breaking things. He gave me that wolfish smile again, the one that felt like a dare. And you won't turn it into origami because you like your pens too much. The lights stuttered one last time before steadying, leaving us locked in a stare neither of us wanted to break. In the silence that followed, I realized two things. 1. This man would test me every step of this project. 2. The building itself seemed to approve of the fight. And for reasons I refused to name, that unsettled me more than the dust on my table. The power died with a sigh, like the building got bored of entertaining us. 1 second the hall hummed with the low thrum of temporary lights and the tinny rattle. Of a radio down the nave the next, silence slipped over everything and pulled it tight. The emergency exit signs went black. Somewhere in the distance, a toolbox clapped shut as if a ghost had gotten impatient. Great, I said into the sudden dark. Because what this project needed was ambience. Bootsteps came up behind me. You always complain this poetically, Dylan asked. Or am I just lucky? I turned. I couldn't see him, but I could feel the size of him rearranging the shadows. The air tasted like dust and metal. You are not lucky. You sat on my table. I'm never gonna live that down, am I? A click. His flashlight stuttered to life. A cone of thin white cutting. Across bare ribs of scaffolding and the faded ribs of the ceiling. Panel tripped, he said. Storm messed with the line. Doors'll reset when it comes back. As if cued, I heard the distant grind of a lock fail to retract. I tried the nearest stairwell door, and it gave me a dead, stubborn shoulder. It's jammed, I reported, because I am a professional who narrates his own doom. You don't say, Dylan muttered. He braced a palm to the push bar and leaned. The door shivered, but didn't yield. Hydraulics sulking. We wait. I hate waiting. Waiting is chaos with a halo. I took out my phone. 1% battery blinked a petty warning and died like it was offended by how I live. Perfect, I said. We might as well light a candle and tell the building our fears. You first, he said, slanting the flashlight up. It threw his face into a series of planes and edges, cheekbone, jaw. The strong bridge of his nose all roughed in construction dust. I'll show you mine if you show me yours. I don't have fears, I lied. I have schedules. He huffed. It could have been a laugh. Sit before you tip over. I chose the steps that folded down to the basement, the kind that creak their opinion of you. He dropped beside me a beat later, boots ringing once on iron, once on stone. The flashlight, propped against his knee, carved us out of the dark in a private little stage. For a while we didn't talk. The building did. Old wood flexed. Somewhere a chain murmured in a draft. Dust drifted through the beam like lazy snow. I told myself the knot between my shoulders was from the long day, not from the proximity of a man who made the room feel smaller. You really don't knock, I said finally. Doors are for people who need permission. His voice was lower in the quiet, not softer exactly, just closer to human. I check for load. If it holds, I go through. Charming philosophy. Did you test the load on my table before you put your entire body on it? Sure did, he said. Held fine. A little squeal. Probably from you. Probably from the table, I corrected. And then, because even I could hear the edge on my voice, I added, this place. I gestured into the dark. She doesn't like surprises. She'll survive us. He tipped his head back against the stairwell wall. She's survived worse. We fell into another pocket of silence. My heartbeat slowed enough for my thoughts to catch up, and they were indelicate. You're trapped with him. You can feel his warmth from 6 inches away. You are a grown man, not a teenager hiding a crush behind building codes. Tell me something, he said. No, that was fast, he said, amused. I meant about the plan. You never mean about the plan, I said, then sighed. Because the dark makes confessions leak. Fine. Tell me why you treat everything like it's already broken. He didn't answer for a moment. When he did, it wasn't the answer I expected. Because a lot of it is, he said simply. You grow up around things that look fine until they decide not to be. You start trusting only what holds. Words don't. People don't. Pressure does. He nudged the flashlight until it shone up through the iron lattice of the stair, scattering a net of light over the ceiling. If stone keeps the line when weather's bad, it's honest. If it crumbles, somebody lied somewhere, maybe a long time ago. Maybe last week. If the stone crumbles, I said, unable to help myself, it might be because someone overbraced it 30 years ago, changed the way the load moves. She's not lying. I caught myself, exhaled. Adaptive. He turned his head. In the weak light, his eyes were near black, the pupils blown wide to drink whatever they could. You talk like that a lot? Only when the building deserves poetry. And I don't, you, I said, deserve a manual with warnings in bold. A smile. Quick. A flash of teeth. Fair. The light flickered, not from the flashlight but from somewhere above us. For a heartbeat the dark deepened, and I had a stupid, childlike thought. She's listening. When the beam steadied, some of the tension in my lungs let go. You go, I said. Because if we were going to be stuck, we might as well commit. Tell me something true. He scratched at the dust along his jaw, thinking. My old man poured concrete till his hands looked like it. He didn't trust anything he couldn't put his weight on. I learned to read the world by leaning on it. He snorted. He used to say, if a thing's meant to be, son, you can stand on it. If it gives, it wasn't truth. I considered that. And women? People? He made a face like I'd asked a trick question. People say a lot of things. I listen. Then I watch their feet. You learn more from where someone stands than what they swear. Pragmatic, I said. Romantic. He laughed softly. Is that what you think romance is? Standing where you said you would? It's a start, I said. My childhood did not feature a lot of standing. He didn't move. But somehow the space shifted toward me. That why you like your pens in a rainbow? I let my head knock back against the wall behind us, felt the chill of stone kiss through my hair. The confession tasted metallic, but it was ready. When I was a kid, if something was in its place, it was safe from being thrown. I blinked, surprised to hear my voice steady. So I put things in place. I became very good at it. Turns out, if you put enough in order, the chaos gets embarrassed and goes elsewhere. He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say that explains a lot. He didn't try to fix it. He just nodded like I'd told him the humidity level. Makes sense, he said. Control's a kind of scaffold. Yes, I said, relieved he'd understood it without making it sentimental. And I don't like people kicking my scaffold because they think it's funny. I wasn't trying to be funny, he said. I was trying to see if you'd fall. And did I? No, a beat. Not yet. The building creaked like an old cat rearranging itself. I shifted. My knee brushed his. It should have been nothing. 2 points of contact in a dark stairwell. But heat moved through the touch in a slow wave, not just skin to skin but outward, into the air, into the wall at my back. The stone, which had been holding the day's chill like a grudge, felt almost warm. I told myself it was the flashlight, the beam, heat from the battery, or the storm. Yes, storms do weird things. Did you feel that? I asked before my dignity could strangle the sentence. What? He said, bland as winter. The wall. He went very still, listening the way builders do, with their hands. He spread his palm flat against the stone and left it there. Yeah, he said after a second. Like it breathed out. We didn't touch again. We didn't move away, either. We existed in that narrow truce of bodies that have admitted proximity without negotiating terms. I tried to remember every reason I disliked him, and got as far as boots on my white floor before, losing my train of thought to the fact that our knees had decided to become a small private star. You're not what I thought, he said quietly. What did you think? I asked, because I am a moth and that sounded like flame. That you were all talk, paper, sharp edges that cut through nothing. The corner of his mouth tugged. Turns out you've got bones, annoying ones, the kind that hold. It should not have pleased me. It did. And you're not entirely a ruin with arms, I said. There's a brain in there, somewhere between your shoulders. He grunted. Don't spread that around. Ruins with arms get better rates. We let that sit. The dark edited us down to outlines. If I turned my head 2 inches, my cheek would brush his shoulder. If he turned 2 inches, I'd smell more soap than dust. We did not turn. Why this building? He asked after a while. You've got a dozen bids a month. Why take the one that tries to fall on you when you argue too loud? Because she matters, I said, and heard how ridiculous it would sound in daylight. Because the city is a story everyone keeps revising, and this one deserves to keep her original lines. Because the man who taught me perspective used to bring me to places like this, on Saturdays, and say, if you look long enough you'll hear how she was made. I dragged a hand over my face. He wasn't my father, but he owned steady hands. That counts. Dylan didn't fill the quiet with sympathy. He nodded, something like respect moving under his expression. I've got a soft spot for places like this too, he admitted. Old concrete. It's honest about what time did to it. Honest is brave, I said. Most people prefer pretty lies. The door above us thunked once, like a heart restarting. A thin red led along the frame woke up. The storm had moved on. The panel, presumably, had forgiven us. Sounds like permission, he said, coming to his feet in one efficient motion. He offered a hand without thinking about it. I looked at it a half-second too long, then took it. His grip pulled me up, steady, warm, all the things my pride pretends I don't need from anyone. When I steadied, he didn't drop my hand immediately. Neither did I pull back. Let go, I said, though my voice did not convince either of us. He did, slowly. You good? I'm fine, I said. We should check the west transept. If the power surge shook anything loose. On it, he shoved the door. This time it opened obediently, the stairwell surrendering us back into the throat of the building. We walked side by side down the corridor, flashlight making our shadows long and married across the tiles. The lights came up in cautious stages, one, then another, then a row, like someone waking from a nap and deciding to be kind. At the transept, everything held. The columns, the patched ribs of ceiling, the glittering patience of the stained glass. We stood there, two silhouettes watching a patient breathe. If the stone holds, Dylan said, almost to himself, it's truth. And if it doesn't, I said, that's not a lie. That's a call for help. He glanced at me. His smile was quick, like a man agreeing to an argument he intended to win later. Good thing we're here then. We were still too close. The building was still too warm. I told myself it was the lights. I told myself it was the storm. I told myself a lot of things. None of them addressed the fact that the trap tonight had not been the door. It was the gravity of him, and the way the old walls seemed to approve. Morning light spilled into the nave like it was trying too hard, too clean, too forgiving for a place that never slept quietly. The scent of lime and wet dust clung to the air, mixed with the sharp tang of fresh-cut timber. It should have calmed me. It didn't, because the moment I stepped onto the site, I saw it. The column, wrong, out of line by more than a handspan, planted like a misplaced tooth in the jaw of the structure. Everything about it screamed violation. I felt the pulse in my temples spike. Who approved this? My voice cracked the quiet, sharper than the saws. Heads turned, shoulders stiffened. No one answered fast enough. And then Dylan came striding through the maze of scaffolding, sleeves rolled, eyes squinting against the sun slanting through the high windows. He had that maddening confidence of a man who assumed he could fix anything with his hands. I turned on him so fast the workers shuffled back. You what? It's sound. He brushed dust from his palms. Angles work out. It'll carry weight. It's not the line. My voice shot higher. Do you see the emphasis, the symmetry? You've turned her into a parody. He cut me off with a shrug, casual as if we weren't standing in the middle of a desecration. Your paper lines don't always match the real world, Remy. Out here we do what holds. You do what breaks, I snapped. You're destroying the facade. It's an historic crime. His jaw flexed. Better a living crime than a dead saint. The words lodged like grit in my throat. I marched closer, heat sparking up my spine. Don't you dare romanticize negligence. You don't get to decide where history bends. That's not your call. And it's not yours alone either, he shot back. His voice was low, a rumble undercut with anger. You think because you wear glasses and talk like a textbook that makes you high priest of stone? Newsflash, pup, you don't own her. Before I could retort, his hand closed around my wrist. Firm, unyielding. He yanked me forward with enough force that I stumbled, colliding against his chest. We were nose to nose, too close. Heat climbed my skin in waves I didn't consent to. My pulse betrayed me, hammering in my throat. I hated how loud it felt. How obvious. Let go, I managed, breath breaking against his cheek. I'm not your worker. His lips, twitched. Not a smile. Not quite. He leaned in just enough that his voice brushed my ear. Shame. You'd make one hell of a stubborn foreman. The words shivered through me, equal parts insult and something more dangerous. My brain screamed distance, order, logic, but my body froze, suspended in the electricity that leapt between us. For a terrible second, the air shifted. Our gazes locked, and the fight bent into something else, something sharper. He was close enough that if I moved a fraction, if he did, we would have kissed. The column beside us groaned. A thin plume of dust cascaded down, speckling the air between our faces like glitter spilled from nowhere. The sound cut through me like a warning bell. I wrenched free, heart thundering. I don't... The sentence strangled itself. I couldn't finish it, couldn't name what almost happened. His hand dropped, slow, reluctant. His eyes tracked me, unreadable but burning. I turned and fled down the length of the hall, boots slapping against stone, lungs dragging in too much air. Behind me, the building whispered through its bones, the faint hiss of mortar, the shifting of old joints, as if it had seen everything and decided to keep the secret. But the dust still hung in the shaft of light like proof. We had cracked something neither of us meant to touch, and I hated how much of me already wanted to run back into it. By evening, the building had swallowed the city's noise, and kept only what it wanted. The hiss of settling dust, the slow drip somewhere behind a wall, the far-off clank of a chain. The great hall was a dark lung, breathing in the last of the day. Streetlights slid through the stained glass and broke itself on the floor, scattering thin rubies and cold sapphires over my spread of drawings. I had turned the floor into a map of insistence, sleeves and bracing, notes and arrows, my paper body double for the patient, each sheet pinned by little steel rulers and a handful of bolts I'd stolen from a forgotten tray. Even my mess was arranged like a prayer. Working late, pup? His voice arrived first, then his boots across stone, then Dylan himself, moving through the colored light like someone the window had painted on. The day had left salt at his temple and gray dust along his jaw. He always carried the sight with him, as if the building marked him for coming back. We have a load test tomorrow, I said, keeping my eyes on the drawings. I want the crew to see exactly where the stress should travel, where you want it to travel, he corrected, amused. He circled the perimeter of my paper field. Looks like a crime scene. All the little flags of guilt. It's a map, I said. Not everything is murder just because you like to swing at it. He folded down to a crouch, boots creaking, forearms on his knees. The motion should have been casual. It wasn't. He took up space like a decision. You're still mad about the column. Mad implies I haven't already done the math to fix it. I tapped the sleeve detail. We reseat. We brace the base with a cradle. Slow the cure. No shocks. His finger came into my vision, rough, nicked at the knuckle. He traced the line I'd drawn as if to test whether it would stick under his touch. Slow costs money. Fast costs the building. I finally looked at him. And you already knew I'd say that. I did. His mouth twitched. I came for the pleasure of hearing it. That implies you derive pleasure from being wrong. Or from arguing with you. There it was. The spark. The iron striking flint. You like fighting me more than you like winning, I said, too quick. He laughed, low. Who says I don't get both? I stood, too abruptly, nerves sitting under my skin like lit wire. The sleeve connects here. I stepped over a field of annotations to point at a joint. If you let your guys wet set without a mock-up, they won't, he said, not moving, watching me instead of the drawing. I told them you'd haunt their coffee if they did. I prefer the term supervise. Haunt, he repeated, amused. You show up where you're not expected and insist on order like a ghost with a label maker. I opened my mouth, prepared to say something surgical and mean. What came out was truer than I intended. I show up because if I don't, someone will decide the shortcut is worth it. We held that between us, a small admission humming on the floorboards like a live cable. He stood slowly. That shouldn't have felt like a rising tide. It did. Come here, he said. No, I answered, and found I had already taken a half step. He crossed the last of the distance the way water crosses a threshold. No sound and all inevitability. "We're arguing," he said. "Let's do it properly." He pointed to the far end of the hall. "You pull for the knave. I pull for the apse. Whoever makes the better case gets the joint detail." He tilted his head. "Or we compromise." "I hear you're allergic." "I'm allergic to collapse," I said. "But do go on." He went on. We built a duel in the corridor of our patient, lights falling in stained glass squares over our shoulders. He said, "Wait," and I said, "Line." He said, "Snow load," and I said, "Historic profile." His hand cut the air, describing arcs of force. I sketched in the air with mine, a conductor coaxing a silent orchestra. We moved because the argument asked us to. We stepped into and around each other, because the building had rooms to fill with heat. "Your facade wants to breathe," I said, aware of my breath, aware of his. "If you strangle it with continuous steel." "I'm not strangling anything," he said. "I'm giving it a spine." "It has a spine. Then why does it keep reaching for the floor?" "Because time put lead in her bones. And you can pull it out?" He closed the last inch between us. "With lines?" "With choices," I said, and only then realized I'd moved into him, shoulder, almost against chest, our words not needing to travel very far. The quiet that fell wasn't the absence of sound, it was sound remembering itself. The street hum, the sigh of the old wood, the little clink of a bolt deciding it had done enough work on a Tuesday. He smelled like crushed stone, like clean sweat under dust, like a man who ran toward heavy things. My chest hurt in a way completely unrelated to any structural failure. "Remy," he said, and the way he said my name was impolite to something inside me that insisted on decorum. "We should," I began. "Stop?" he asked. "Fix the column." I lied. "We will," he said. And then he was closer, and I was closer, and there was nothing left to do about it. The first touch wasn't careful. It couldn't be. It lived in the same family as our arguments. Direct, hungry. An assertion that felt like surrender and didn't care. His mouth found mine with a certainty I wanted to resent. I didn't. My hand caught at his vest and dragged. His fingers slid against the open buttons of my collar, and I made a sound I'd have to pretend later was something else. Sparks crawled up my neck like a rumor. He bracketed my face in his palms, rough and warm, and the building decided to listen closer. A low hum ran through the floor, slow as breath. The windows colored our skin. For an absurd second, his cheek went cathedral blue under my hand. We broke and came back together, not neatly. My back brushed a column. His knuckles knocked a rolled print that bounced once and rolled away like a spectator with good sense. He murmured something into my mouth that might have been my name again, or might have been a warning, or might have been prayer. I answered by tugging him down to my paper field. Because of course, this would happen on top of everything I'd tried to lay in order. He laughed against my throat, shocked and delighted and breathless. "On your homework?" "On the plan," I said, my voice not my own. "So you don't forget." We went down together. The drawings slipped under my shoulder like silk turned traitor. Bolts clicked, as if taking a tally. The streetlight made the room a shallow, stained pool. I had one bright thought: "You're being exactly what you promised yourself you wouldn't," and then he kissed the thought out of me. "Careful," I said, though I didn't mean it about the paper. "Not how I do things," he said. Words slow in the warm place where my collar met my throat. "Obviously," I managed, as his weight pressed along the shape of me and every future argument we'd ever have flickered across my skin like heat lightning. He dragged his mouth up to my ear, breath a scorch. "Tell me to stop, Remy." "Tell yourself," I shot back, and reached for him because defiance is a kind of honesty. His laugh hit the edge of a groan and turned into something lower. "You really are a stubborn foreman. Not your worker," I said, dizzy with the need to say it. "I know." He kissed the hinge of my jaw. "That's why I'm asking." That word did something merciless. Ask. As if consent was a tool he owned and used. As if he understood how to hold weight without breaking what carried it. I swallowed. "You won't get me like everyone else," I said, because the truth had gotten cheap, and I needed to spend it on something that mattered. He stilled, A pause that read as respect, not caution, then bent to my neck, voice low enough to stumble in it. "You're not like everyone else," he said. "That's why I want you." The floor thrummed. It wasn't my heartbeat. It wasn't his. It was older, a low contented drone moving through beams and joists, as if the building had decided to relax one nail at a time. Dust lifted and resettled in slow motion, a soft glitter drifting down through the colored light like blessings cut into confetti. He kissed me like we'd been arguing toward it for weeks. Maybe we had. Every shove of his palm at my waist, every tug of my hand at his collar, every small, necessary sound swallowed by the hall belonged to a language we'd been learning under our breath. When he pressed his forehead to mine to breathe, it felt like the polite version of a collision. "Remy," he said again, but it was a different word now, less warning, more arrival. "Dylan," I answered, because names are a kind of scaffolding too, and sometimes you need one to climb back down from the heat of where you've gone. We did not become careful. We became precise. My world narrowed to the heat of him and the cold of the floor, to the way paper folded around shoulder blades and made a hush like winter grass under a body. At some point a pen cracked under my thigh and bled. At some point his vest ended up as a barricade under my back. None of those logistics mattered, which is how I knew I was lost. I hated that I could make a catalog of what I loved, the weight of him like a promise, the rough catch of his breath when I mouthed along his throat. The way he said yeah, like a man who doesn't ask for much and didn't expect to be given this. I hated that I loved the fact that he was careful where it counted, imprecise where I wanted. I hated that the building hummed approval like an old aunt who'd seen this sort of thing a century ago and wasn't scandalized anymore. I hated him. Or myself. Both. Maybe. The part of me trained to arrange and withhold threw up its hands. The part of me that had stood under a failing ceiling and felt a hand close around my elbow gave me permission. I hated him. Or I hated the version of me that existed around him. But in that moment, I burned with him. When sense returned, it did so politely, knocking once, then slipping in after. The hall was a lit bowl of dim color. Our breath moved the dust in long, slow tides. Somewhere a bolt finished rolling and chimed to a stop against a baseboard like the end of a song. Dylan lowered his forehead to mine again and stayed there, both of us collecting our names where we'd dropped them. "Tell me you're okay," he said. Not because he doubted, because he didn't. I tried on a few words, none of them fit. "I'm not paperwork right now." His mouth crooked. "Good. I'm also furious," I added, because anger would always be my favorite way to hide something gentler. "Also good," he said. And it should have been infuriating that he meant it. We lay on my plans and breathed like two men who'd done something beyond argument and found it didn't undo them. The windows threw a final thin blade of gold across the floor, cut it into rubies, then let it go. Eventually I said, "You're wrinkling my details." He made a content noise, a sound like a man sitting down after carrying too much weight. "I'll iron them," he promised, and even in the joke I heard that he meant some version of it. When we stood, the paper kept our shapes. A crease here, a smudge there, the ghost of a decision. It didn't feel like ruin. It felt like annotation. Dylan touched 2 fingers to the sleeve detail, then to my wrist, brief and unceremonious. "Load test tomorrow," he said. "We do it your way." "Our way," I corrected, surprising us both. He nodded once, and the agreement sat between us like a beam bridging 2 walls that had spent a month pretending they weren't holding up the same roof. Behind us, the building exhaled again, long and pleased. The dust settled into the lines of my drawings like gold finding the cracks in a bowl. Morning pretended it hadn't seen us. The sight woke the way it always did. Coffee steam, the clack of tape measures, the cough of a generator, the low chorus of men greeting the day in monosyllables. The great hall yawned itself into light. The stained glass, scrubbed yesterday until it remembered what color was, sifted the sun into square mosaics on the floor. Dust lifted and made a faint glitter like someone had shaken a tiny snow globe. I stood where the drawings had been and tried to look like a man who hadn't used his own plans as a bed. "Morning, boss," a carpenter said, wheeling a cart past. He didn't look at the ghost creases in my sleeve detail. Maybe he didn't see them. Maybe the building had smoothed them while we slept. "Morning," I said. My voice cleared itself, politely, as if we were strangers. Dylan arrived with the second wave of light. He came in through the south door like he always did, a silhouette big enough to have the room. He looked normal, dust on his boots, coffee in his hand, a new nick on a knuckle that hadn't been there last night. He glanced once at me, once at the cleaned floor, then at the repaired line of the nave, the column we'd argued. Into compliance now sitting in its proper stance like a soldier that had remembered the parade ground. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I echoed. We were excellent liars for 3 minutes. "Load test," I said, gesturing with my clipboard. "Load test," he agreed, lifting his coffee in a small salute. He peeled off toward the crew. I set about doing the things that kept my hands occupied, checking the humidity log, counting the shims in a bucket that had decided to multiply, documenting hairline seams that had stopped traveling and started healing. The model of a good architect is to appear calm while everything beautiful tries to die. Today, it didn't. Today, it wanted to live. The steel cradle we'd argued into existence held the base of the misset, column like a palm, spreading the bite of weight where it needed to go. New grout, slow cured, gleamed a shade paler than the old stone. The sleeve, my sleeve, sat around the shaft with just enough forgiveness. If I put my cheek to it, I could feel a faint residual warmth, like bread that had come out of the oven an hour ago. Dylan moved through his men like a current. Quiet, directive, a presence that made tools remember what they were for. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. He leaned on a beam to feel for the mood of it. He watched the floor under a jack as carefully as he watched faces. When eyes flicked to me for a cue, he let them, and didn't make it a game. Trust entered the room without clearing its throat. We took readings. We checked deflection. We increased the load by kissable increments. Nothing screamed. Nothing sighed. The dial gauge's needle moved within the narrow band I had allowed it. The column, back in line, took the weight and gave it to the floor the way a good story gives its truth to the listener. "Hold," Dylan said, as if to the whole building. "Hold," I repeated. To myself or to the column, I couldn't tell. The gauge steadied. The hall did that thing it does where it becomes more itself. I felt it under my feet. A quiet confidence in the planks. The house remembered it was a house. "Looks good," his foreman said. "It does," I agreed too quickly, and then in a voice that sounded like me, "We'll reevaluate it for." No ladders against the clerestory in the meantime. "No ladders," the foreman echoed, already texting someone to make a sign. By midday, the site had turned efficient in a way that felt less like correction and more like music. We had fought our duet into a rhythm, and now the instruments could be played. Dylan's crew braced the western wall exactly where I'd chalked a pain point. My tech logged the mortar temps. Without a single decimal out of place, the dehumidifier in the apps hummed the note it had been hired for. No one called the nave a haunted church. No one swung anything they hadn't measured twice. We met by accident, if accidents exist, at the south transept. The stained glass there wore a strip of pale sky. The colors didn't shout. They had learned whispering was a more durable art. "How's your patient?" he asked, nodding to the realigned column. "She's decided to forgive you," I said, straightening a plastic cone that had dared a small slouch. "Forgive us," he corrected, and the word was an admission he wouldn't have made last week. We walked the line together, two men pretending not to notice the gravity that had redrawn its map overnight. The pretend frayed where it touched the edges. "I wanted to tell you," he began. "I was going to say," I said at the same time. We stopped. We did not look at each other. Somewhere behind us, a hammer ticked a rhythm like a heartbeat deciding to keep going. "You first," he said. "No," I said. Which meant, yes. I was going to say you didn't push when I said you wouldn't get me like everyone else. My hand made a small traitor's gesture toward the floor that had once been paper. "I noticed. I wasn't pushing," he said. "I was leaning." "There's a difference." "I know," I said, too quietly. He made a sound that might have been agreement, might have been relief. "You scare me a little, Remy." I laughed, because otherwise my face was going to do something earnest. "Me? I'm pens and grids. You're a man who can stand under a ceiling and keep listening, even when it drops dust in your eyes." He shrugged, half embarrassed. You hold. I opened my mouth to say something, deflecting. What came out, light, dry, almost gentle, surprised me. Then we have an understanding. We do. He tipped his head toward the window, where afternoon was busy becoming a better version of itself. Let's go show her what that looks like. Her, meaning the building. Or, not only the building. By late afternoon, the hall looked new without pretending it hadn't been old. The columns stood in a row that would have satisfied any lens. The capitals, cleaned and mended, wore their age, like the kind of jewelry that doesn't go out of style. The floor glowed with the careful sheen of wood that someone had loved. We had left the honest scars, the tiny seams, the faint changes in tone, so no one would forget what time had done and what hands had answered. Bring the coverings down, I said. Let's give her her light. Canvas and Polly slid away. Dust blew a last kiss and settled into cracks so fine you could only see them if you cared. Sun caught the red pane in the western window and sent a blade of color through the room. It found the sleeve detail on the real column, moved along it like a fingertip, then climbed and climbed until it spilled, incredibly, exactly where we stood. I could pretend the geometry was coincidence. I did not believe in coincidence anymore. The beam warmed my cheek. When I blinked, the gold went through my lashes and stitched a private seam of light at the corner of my vision. We both looked up. The glass, finally clean enough to be church again, looked back, unbothered. I didn't think I'd say this, I said, the line tasting like a joke, with a vein of truth. But your sledgehammer method sometimes works. He grinned, helpless against it. And your blueprints are not always useless. Our laughter was the kind that unclenches other people's shoulders. The foreman looked over, saw nothing to worry about, and went back to measuring. A carpenter whistled something cheerful. The building, indecently, glowed. We stood in that wide beam like two men in a photograph no one would believe later. I could feel it trying to bless us. I let it. Dinner, he said, very neutral. Inspection notes, I countered, just as neutral. Inspection notes first, he compromised, which was how I knew we'd both already decided. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. Trust is a physical thing. You can feel the weight of it without putting hands on it. The smallest breeze moved across the nave, and the sunbeam shifted half an inch, still claiming us. Still, admitting that a building and a pair of idiots can sometimes agree on something larger than themselves. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow, he echoed. We watched our patient breathe. We watched the light make promises it could keep. And somewhere under my ribs, where the old scaffolding had rattled for years, the new structure settled. Quiet, simple, true.